I wanna be a producer with a hit show on Broadway. I wanna be a producer.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Producer's Perspective podcast. A few weeks ago, the annual Spring Road Conference was held here in the city. And if you don't know what the Road Conference is, it's when the presenters and staffs of all the theaters around the country that present touring Broadway productions descend upon New York City to address issues facing the road, take in all the new musicals on Broadway, and go to a lot of cocktail parties, like a lot of them. And every year at the conference, I'm reminded of how much our business depends on, quote, the road, end quote, and touring. As a New York producer, it's easy for me to get lost in only thinking about the 10-block radius I live and work in. But the fact is, Broadway is a huge street that stretches across the country. You'd think I'd remember that since my first taste of Broadway was a tour of Cats at the Colonial Theater in Boston. And that's why I brought in today's guest, who is an expert on the road. Today we're talking to one of the premier booking agents in all of Broadway, Steve Schnepp, president of Broadway Booking Office, or as we call it, BBO. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you so much, Ken. Pleasure to be in your pod.
Steve has been booking Broadway shows around the country since 1989. His current roster includes shows like Les Mis, Jersey Boys, Phantom, Beautiful, Matilda, Gentleman's Guide, and more. That's right, if you saw one of those shows in a theater near you, then Steve was the guy that helped make it happen. So Steve, I think of booking agents as the wizard behind the curtain for touring shows. We don't hear a lot about you, but you really do make a lot of these tours happen. Tell me, in your words, what does a booking agent do? What's your job?
Well, we don't have little smart outfits, little wizard outfits, but just regular business wear. And our job basically is to meet with producers such as yourself, talk about the show, your show in New York, for example, how it's selling, how the reviews are, meet with you about advisements about how we could put a tour together. And then we introduce that tour to presenters and theaters across the country. And then our job is to try to put those cities in some sort of logical geographical order so that you have a tour that can be as long as possible and to maximize your revenue.
And how did you get started in this business? Very unique part of the industry.
Yeah, I guess, I started really collecting a lot of different experiences in the theater. I was a journalism major in Texas, and then I worked in a theater, a roadhouse in Austin, Texas, for 5 years doing operations, and then so I built on that, and then I became a road manager for 5.5 years, a company manager for 5.5 years, and then in 1989 they were looking for someone. Cameron Mackintosh was looking for someone to work with his booking agent that they had hired, Tom Mallow, and I was selected. So I started working on touring Les Miserables around North America. And Lapse Dissolve, worked for Cameron Mackintosh solidly as an employee for about 11 years and worked on tours for Les Miserables and Phantom of the Opera and Miss Saigon and Five Guys Named Mo. So it was a gradual collection of experiences.
So Les Mis and Phantom and the Cameron shows actually of the late 80s, early 90s really redefined or defined a new era in touring, right? What was it like putting Les Mis out on the road initially like that? Was there a huge appetite for it? Was it a challenging sell?
There was a huge demand for it, a huge demand for Les Miserables. After Cats had done a very good job, which you toured in, or worked at the Colonial, I think you said. Before that time period, touring throughout North America was a different landscape. That was producers securing venues around the country, usually in a high-risk position. They were in a high-risk position, and they would put engagements, let's say in Philadelphia, on sale, and then a few weeks later they'd put Boston on sale. And they'd play Philadelphia, and if it did great, they'd move to Boston, and they'd spend money in advertising there. Then they'd move to the next market. If it didn't do well, then they would play a few markets. If they lost money here, lost money in the next one, they would close down. So in the mid-'80s, the creation of the guarantee that the local presenter, the local theater operator, would pay the producer a guaranteed sum, that was really what changed the business and changed how work is done. So Les Miserables was one of the shows that really kind of leapt out of the gate.
See, I didn't even know that. So the guarantee, for those of you who don't know what the guarantee is, again, That's literally a presenter saying, I'm going to guarantee you X amount of dollars, so they're guaranteed a show is going to come in the doors. And the mid-'80s is when that started. But before that, these shows could close after one or two presentations.
Yeah, I got a job as a company manager, leaving Austin, Texas, being a road manager, because the tour of Little Shop of Horrors played, I think, a consecutive series of engagements and lost money, and then they closed the tour. So this replacement, Austin was on the route for that, and it never made it to Austin. So we had a replacement show, and that show needed a company manager, and I said, okay.
And producers were booking their own tours at this time, or were booking agents really born out of this era?
Really, in the early 80s and before that, it was really producers would come to New York to one central booking office called the IBO, and that's when they would go with one fellow. He had all the availabilities on one big spreadsheet, big chart, and you would sit down with your tour as a producer. You'd sit down and say, I want a tour. So you'd sit down and he would give you which cities you would play at what time. It was sort of doled out that way. And then later on, booking agents, that was all dissolved, and then booking agencies were grown in the mid-'80s.
So tell me, you talked a little bit about it, but let's say I've got a show. I want to tour it. It's running here in New York. I knock on your door and I say, Steve, I'm interested in touring this show. What are the first questions or the first things that you look at to decide whether or not it's viable?
Please come in, I would say, if you knocked on the door.
Offer me a nice frosty beverage, which I have in front of me right now.
We would talk about the show of sort of first of all, the critical acclaim of the show. We would talk about the sales in New York, how the audiences are reacting to the show, how your advance is building in New York. And then we would talk about what way you might consider touring, whether you wanted to receive a guaranteed amount of money from presenters, or whether you'd want to be in a risk position and play multiple weeks in a market that traditionally only plays 1 week. So we would sit with you and talk about all of those decisions and advise you. And then we would, when you're comfortable, we would sort of then announce it to presenters that it's going to be touring.
Is there, you talk about this, looking at the sales figures for New York, is there a formula for what works on the road based on what works in New York?
Not exactly, but those are the indicators that we have early on in a production. We like you, look at all the data that's available for the show in New York, and then try to make an advisement and a prediction. Of course, we talk to presenters day in, day out, and get their response too, to how is word of mouth, how have they heard about it, because word of mouth obviously is our strongest seller to presenters as well as to ticket buyers.
Can a show work in New York and flop on the road, and vice versa? Does that happen?
I think there was and this is discussed at the League conference that you mentioned at your opening remarks. There was a sort of a myth or a theory that wow, the show's not working in New York, but it's a great show for the road. And that's a little hard, because ultimately...
Ooh, I know exactly who said that. I was there when they said that, and I wondered the same question, will this work?
It's ultimately about the show and the audience. And so if the audiences are not having a great time in New York, audiences around the country might not have a great time. If they're having a fantastic time and on their feet and cheering, likely the people in Louisville or Cincinnati or Des Moines will have a similar reaction.
Do we need stars on the road today? Like we New York seems to me anyway, especially when I'm looking for a theater these days, seems to be very star dependent. Is the road audience desperate for stars as well? The presenters looking for them?
I think that's a hard question, because what is a star and what's the value basically of that star in a market? That's the real question. So in New York, you have many star vehicles, and they're generally limited plays, right? They're plays for sort of closed-ended runs. So stars are not probably the first thing that you would want to put that. In the years ago, yes, stars did tour, and that was a norm. They would do the Broadway run, and then they would do a tour or two. That was really, Carol Channing did it for years.
But the simplest way to get a successful tour sold seems to be to have a successful run in New York. The more successful the run in New York, the easier it is for you to get presenters to buy.
That's right.
plays on the road? Is there a place for plays? As I was reading out over your credits. I don't think I read any plays in there.
Well,
you've done them before, though, right? And there was an appetite for them? Is there now? How has that changed?
Well, to your other point of plays in New York, they're often star vehicles, and those stars pretty much don't want to travel around the country and give up 6 to 8 to a year, 8 months of work. So we have to kind of take that off the table. There's room for the play still, very, very much room for a play. The last play we worked on was War Horse, and we had about 2.5 years of that. So but it was a very big event. It felt sort of like a musical, in that big way. Plays have successfully toured for years, and I think they'll continue to tour. It's usually the winner of the best play of the Tony Awards.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about War Horse being a big production, almost like a musical. I feel that way about Curious Incident right now. Like, I'm predicting that will tour. Regardless of what happens at the Tonys, I have a feeling that show, which again feels so big, that it will get out there.
I hope you're right. I love that show.
Yeah. Is it yours?
We're working on the press and marketing.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. What are the challenges facing the road today that you obviously, I don't talk to presenters every day, even when I'm doing tours, and I think it should be done more often, frankly. What are you hearing from presenters are their biggest challenges?
Biggest challenges, presenters really want quality productions. They want quality productions, and their jobs are to put together a series of shows in a package that will attract subscribers to buy into that package. So I think they're in the interesting position of programming shows that and putting together an entire package that can be cost effective to their subscribers. That's probably the biggest challenge, I think, is the balancing act that the presenters do, having agents like me calling them on the phone, introducing ideas to them, and there's other agents too that do the same work. So it's for them, it's trying to balance all of that, all of those concerns.
But quality more than price, and more than guarantee. You think the first thing that they're interested in is making sure it's a top-notch show?
Yes, I do believe that quality equal to and price as well. Yeah,
but that's interestingly enough. I asked that question again because that seems to me the same issues that our audience goes through. Mm-hmm. Even we talk about how expensive Broadway tickets are, but the fact is they want a great show, and when there's a great show, they'll pay $150, $200 for it.
That's right.
That's more of a concern to them than price. So speaking of quality of production, here's the big controversial question. Here it is. You ready?
Drum roll.
Is there room on the road for non-union tours?
There's room on the road for non-union tours, I think, in a very select way. Most of some markets will not program non-union shows. Some markets find a space for it in some area of their programming. Generally, the non-union tours, as a generality, they play mainly single nights, and so the production, after it's played for many, many, many months in a union large format. So generally speaking, the non-union tours are generally smaller and can play shorter runs.
So there is a room, just the right venues, and some people can't afford big union tours, right?
Many markets that program one night, they've been programming one night since the 80s, and what they can pay for that one night hasn't changed that dramatically over the years. Maybe by a few $1,000s. So
this is something that I've heard a lot, and that touring, the guarantees. Well, let me ask you a question. Les Mis, what was the guarantee of Les Mis when you were selling it in 1989, approximately?
I think it was $275,000.
$275,000 a week for Les Mis in 1989. You're booking Les Mis now. What's the approximate guarantee?
Well, we're not quite there. We did a very successful tour of Les Miserables, and it's now on hiatus right now.
Okay, but when it was out?
$315.
$315. So a difference of not $50,000, somewhere around there, somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000 in 25 years. That's not a big increase in that guarantee.
That's right.
Why? You would think, look, what were our ticket prices on Broadway in that era? $50.
The top on the road, when Les Mis first toured, I think was probably in the 50s, like 50 something, because I remember Phantom kind of helped break that margin. It was $60 in some markets.
And top now on the road?
It's high.
Over 100?
In some markets, based on dynamic pricing.
So ticket pricing has gone up just like Broadway, but the guarantee has not.
8 years ago is really when dynamic pricing really hit the road. That's really when theaters around the country, in big markets and medium-sized and small markets, all sort of embraced this changing the price point up and down to accommodate demand. It's a huge thing now.
Yeah, so I've heard this at many a road conference from many a producer and a general manager screaming about how the guarantees have not increased at the appropriate level, percentage, since the beginning. And of course, presenters, in their defense, have been jumping up and down saying, you want to try to keep a subscription model together in 2015? And I promise all of you right now, we're going to have a presenter on this podcast coming up because I want to hear their side of the story, which I think is a very good one.
It's an excellent. So they do a lot of work.
But it is fascinating how the business, that's how much it's changed, is that the financial model is so different now. What are the other big changes you've seen in the past 25 years on the road that are affecting the way tours are booked or sold?
Well, as I mentioned before, the birth of the guarantee was a change in the road. The other big change has been generally the increase in subscription sales in all of the markets. Cleveland now has a 2-week subscription footprint, and they have 32,000 subscribers. That's a lot. It's really good. So the subscriptions have grown. More people, and that's primarily because I think more people that are not used to coming to the theater come to the theater, have a good time, and decide to subscribe. What's also changed in the last 25 years, I guess, is the mega musical there's more of them. In the 90s, Les Miserables was out. Then Phantom of the Opera came out. Then Miss Saigon came out. And those all had their courses and so forth, and they would return to markets which would invite single ticket buyers into those markets and get them to sign up for subscriptions. Now, it's not just 1 or 2 mega musicals touring around. It's Lion King, it's Wicked, Book of Mormon, Jersey Boys. Those are all out there as well. So that has helped the road a lot, in addition to having fresh group of shows every season coming on subscription sales.
Is there, in the era of these mega musicals, is there room for something small that no one's ever heard of, maybe that doesn't win an award that's totally original? How does that sneak into these seasons?
Pretty much the job that we have as booking agents for touring Broadway is the show has to be either a success in London or a success in New York, or have Hugh Jackman in it, a major star. So that's really what they're looking for. Yes, there's room. Some presenters do mix and match some things that are smaller on their seasons, but that's pretty much the rare case.
Do you have let's go into the closet and find some dirty road story, if you will. What's the worst road story you could think of? Trucks collapsing on the highway, any crises, any fun stuff that you can remember?
Well, as a road manager, I do remember having, we had the Radio City Rockettes on a tour. We broke down in Iowa. I remember being on the bus, watching outside the window and seeing this wheel roll past us. It was our wheel for the bus, rolling past us. So the job was to try to flag down some police, which we did, and they brought a big old trailer and put us all in there and took us to the best little motel that was close by.
Did you make it to the show on time?
It was a day off, so we did that, so that was good, and so we did make it to the show the next day.
Thank goodness. You've worked with a lot of producers, obviously. Is there a difference between being a Broadway producer and being a road producer, producing for the road versus producing in New York?
I think, I love all the producers we work with. They each have their own personalities, their own set of experiences, their own interests, and how much detail they want to know about touring, about the routes and so forth. So we try to fit each producer, give them the information they want.
And what if you could design your version of the perfect producer for the road? What are the characteristics that person would have?
Well, it's pretty much soup to nuts. It's a grasp with the artistic, a grasp with what's happening on stage, command of all the designers and directors, committed to keeping the show always looking fantastic, understanding about routing and booking deals and marketing plans and ad looks and press stories and raising ticket prices and lowering prices, how wraps come in to play with all this, how the weekly sales come in. So that's basically a producer that knows about the whole gamut.
Now, one of the things that I often forget about our country, actually, is that we're very different. Travel outside of New York City, and it's a whole different world out there. Sometimes it's amazing that it's even the same country. Yet these shows that are born in New York City and play to a very specific audience here, then travel all over the country to places like Harlingen, Texas, where I played when I was the company manager of a non-union tour there. Now they have different tastes, different cultures, different upbringings. Have you ever dealt with a situation where people have said, you know what, we want this show, but you got to change X, Y, and Z about it? You have to cut this song or remove this profanity, or this is too sexual, or this is that. Have you ever dealt with a situation where people are asking for things to be adjusted? In
rare cases, people have asked for perhaps some language to be removed a little bit. It's pretty much rare. I think for the most part, producers don't want to change the production or sanitize it for what they think the public's going to want. Pretty much they present the show as it is, and I think audiences appreciate that.
Have you ever had to sell someone on a show that was like, I don't think this is for our audience, whether it was Rent in 1998, right? Something like that, or a quote unquote controversial show that you had to be like, no, trust us, your market is ready for it?
I think so. Light in the Piazza was up at Lincoln Center, and we were going up, and my husband said, we're going to go see this production. It's written by, a relative of Richard Rodgers. It's supposed to be wonderful. So I went to see it, and I fell in love with it. I was blown away by the story, by the music, all of it. I had never worked with Lincoln Center or Bernie Gersten, so I called him up the next morning and said, may I come meet with you? He said, yes. We met. I said, I think there's really a tour here. And he said, are you sure? You think it can really be a tour? I said, I do. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful story, and it will be a very touching story, and people will embrace it. He introduced the idea to presenters, and a few of them said, well, there's some Italian in it. I said, well, it's one song that's sung in Italian, but so audiences can understand that. They can understand what's happening on stage. So we got past that, and basically the audiences, we ended up getting a 45-week tour of that. And presenters embraced it. They got every notice on the newspapers and online were all raves. One of the things I mentioned to presenters to try to get them on board for this controversial material, if you will, because it had some Italian in it, is I said, you saw the show, right, in New York? They said, yes. I said, who did you see it with? They said, well, our director of development. I said, well, that's great. But Lincoln Center has now offered to buy another pair of tickets for you. Come back with someone you love deeply in your life. And I want you to experience the show in that way, because most likely your audiences are going to experience the show with someone that they love, someone that's close to them. So that was one way to get the presenters on board.
And it worked.
It worked.
Let's talk about the road in general a bit. If the road was a patient at a hospital, how would you describe its health? Would it be just fine, no problem? Would it be sick, dying, needs intensive care? How do you rate the road these days in terms of its health?
Very, very healthy, vibrant, hearty.
And where do you think it'll go in the next 10 years, 20 years? We've seen when the road began, let's say, or was reborn in the 80s with Les Mis, and all those mega musicals. We saw the guarantee. What's the next thing? Is there a next thing that's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years from now?
Ooh, I hope that we have more and more people coming into the theater that have not been to that theater in their market. This is, what is this? What I heard about this online, or I heard about this, or I got an email about this, and because I bought a concert ticket, and then they'll come into the theater, and then they'll have a great time and enjoy themselves.
Are there some producers out there that are pushing new financial models? Are there people suggesting, you know what, this guarantee thing isn't working like it used to work? Our guarantees haven't gone up since 1990. What about trying something new?
Well, every show has its own sort of financial model. The guarantee is one way of doing it. The other way is sort of a sharing terms arrangement where something comes off the top, maybe it's advertising, comes off the top, and then there's a split of proceeds. So, and that exists today. So there's quite a few models. There's also models where the producer rents the theater, like in the very old-fashioned days. So there's several models that exist, and it's really market-driven.
Okay, last question. I call it my genie question.
Okay.
Which is, I want you to imagine that the genie knocks on your very nicely decorated office, by the way, on the door here, and says, Steve, you've done a fantastic job of booking shows all over the country and really helping to stretch Broadway from New York to all these small towns like Harlingen, Texas. I'm going to grant you one wish. If you could change one thing about Broadway, the road, our industry, what would it be? What is the one thing that drives you crazy? You're like one of the nicest guys I know, which is why I wanted to do this podcast. What gets you so mad, so angry, that you'd ask this genie with the snap of a finger that you would change?
I would like, Genie, in every market around the country, I'd like for you to produce at the front of the theater 5,000 people who've never been through that door to come through the door and be in that theater a year, and that those people would then be hooked on touring Broadway and would want to come back and would tell their friends.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you another question based on that, because of course, this is something that keeps me up at night constantly, is how we get new people to the theater. What do you think, well, forget about Broadway. We need to do a lot more, obviously, and we just busted an attendance record, so we're doing some really good things, and we're keeping at it, which is great. And I think the road is doing good stuff, but what's an idea, or what's something that they can do out there, or even people listening, to try to get new people to the theater in these local markets that can't see Broadway every day?
Well, I think many people are doing that right now. They're trying to bring audiences in there when they have, basically, one way is adjusting price points, giving a variety of price points so that people don't, choke over the price point. They can sit somewhere in the theater at some price point. The goal, to sell sort of the upstairs seats, and the orchestra's already sold down there, so you're putting pressure then on the middle seats to be sold. So if you can move those balcony seats first, as well as the orchestra, which goes always first, then you're giving more opportunity for more people to come into the theater. We all pay our bills downstairs in the orchestra and in the mezzanine, and we make our profit in the rear orchestra and in the balcony. So.
Great answer. Steve, thank you so much for doing this today. All of you out there, remember, Broadway is not just this 10-block radius here in Times Square. It is all over the country. Go see a show at your local market today. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ken.